The night had swallowed the prairie whole by the time Lena Hart stumbled across the weathered fence line. Her lungs burned, each breath slicing through her chest like cold steel. She didn't know how long she had been running, only that she couldn't stop. Not yet. Not while the moon was still high and the men searching for her still had horses faster than her shaking legs. Her thin shoes were ruined, the soles torn open by rocks and thistles. Her dress, once pale green, was now streaked with dirt and torn at the hem. The wind cut through the fabric, sending shivers across her bruised skin. But she forced herself forward, whispering silently, "Just a little more. Just a place to hide. Just until morning." That was when she saw it through the trees, a tall barn, dark and wide-shouldered like a silhouette against the sky. No lanterns glowing inside. No movement. Just a quiet structure, standing patiently as if waiting for her. Lena didn't think. Her exhausted body moved on instinct. She unlatched the gate and hurried across the yard, feeling exposed beneath the open stretch of stars. The barn door groaned softly as she pushed it open, and the smell of hay and old wood wrapped around her like a blanket. Inside, it was warmer than the outside air. A lantern had been left extinguished on a hook near the wall, and the soft snuffling of horses drifted from the stalls. Lena froze for a moment, fear pulsing in her throat. If the barn had horses, then someone lived here. Someone would eventually come, but she was out of time. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she clung to a wooden post to steady herself. "I just need a few hours," she told herself. "Just until my heartbeat stops shaking my bones." She crept toward the far corner, where stacks of hay bales sat like a golden fortress. Climbing onto one, she curled into the small space between two stacks. The hay pricked at her arms and neck, but she didn't care. She pulled a handful under her body to soften the wood beneath and tucked another handful beneath her cheek. Her eyelids fluttered with exhaustion, the darkness welcoming her like a heavy blanket she couldn't refuse. Before she slipped into sleep, she whispered a promise to herself, "No one will find me here." But morning did come, and with it came the sound of footsteps. Heavy ones. Slow ones, the kind that belonged to a man built like a mountain. Lena's eyes flew open. Her heart slammed against her ribs as the barn door creaked open and sunlight poured in. Dust motes danced in the golden light as a large shadow paused in the doorway. The footsteps moved inside. A man's deep voice murmured to a horse. Leather creaked, metal clinked. Then the footsteps turned toward her hiding place. Lena flattened herself deeper into the hay, barely breathing. But it was too late. A large hand swept aside some of the loose straw, and she found herself staring into the startled eyes of a cowboy, whose sheer size filled the whole world. Callum Reed. He towered over her, broad shoulders blocking the sunlight. His jaw was covered in morning stubble, his hair tousled from sleep. His eyes, light, steady, and unexpectedly gentle, widened as he took in the sight of her small, trembling form curled in his hay. He didn't shout. He didn't grab her. He simply said, in a voice low enough not to spook a frightened animal, "Darlin', what happened to you?" And for the first time in many months, Lena didn't feel hunted. She felt found. Callum Reed did not rush forward. He didn't demand answers or bark questions. Instead, he crouched slowly, lowering his massive frame until he was eye level with the fragile girl curled into the hay like a wounded bird. The boards beneath him creaked under his weight, but his movements were gentle. Practiced, he had handled enough skittish animals to know how easily fear could shatter something already on the edge. Lena pressed herself against the haystack, fingers trembling, breath hitching in ragged little gasps. Her eyes darted everywhere, the barn door, the floor, his hands searching for escape. But her body was too exhausted to run again. Callum saw all of it. Saw the panic, the bruises, the dirt-streaked face that looked like it hadn't seen rest in days. his brows knit together with a quiet concern. This wasn't some mischievous trespasser or curious traveler. This was someone fleeing something awful. He placed his hands palm down on his knees, making sure she saw he wasn't reaching for her. "You're hurt," he said softly. His voice was deep, rough around the edges, but warm. A voice used to calming colts and frighten calves. "But you're safe here. Ain't no one gonna harm you." Lena swallowed hard. Her lips were cracked. "Please, I'll leave. Just needed a place for the night. Please don't tell anyone I was here." Callum shook his head lightly. "You ain't going anywhere in that state." Her eyes shimmered with panic. "You don't understand. If they find me," he lifted one hand slowly only a few inches to quiet her, "then they'll have to get through me first." The words seemed too large, too impossible. Lena stared at him, confused, unsure why a stranger would take her side so quickly. But Callum wasn't acting his instinct to protect Ranbone Deep. He stood to his full height, a towering silhouette against the beams of morning light. Then he reached behind him and grabbed a wool blanket hanging on a hook. He placed it gently beside her, not touching her, just leaving it within reach. "Here," he said. "You're shiverin'." Lena hesitated before wrapping the blanket around herself. Warmth seeped into her bones, and her whole body sagged in relief. Callum stepped back, giving her space. "What's your name?" She lowered her gaze. "Lena." "Well, Lena," he said, nodding gently, "I'm Callum Reed. You're on my ranch. But you ain't trespassing in any way that bothers me." Her eyes drifted to the barn doors. Callum followed her gaze. "Someone after you?" he asked quietly. Fear flashed across her face before she quickly tried to hide it. That was answer enough. Callum sighed, pressing a hand to the back of his neck. He wasn't a man who knew much about solving other people's problems. He kept to himself, lived quietly, and preferred the company of animals to most folks. But there was something about the girl that tugged at him, her smallness compared to the world. Her exhaustion, the way she flinched from loud sounds. "Listen," he said, voice low but certain, "you don't gotta tell me everything right now. But you need water, food, and rest. You're safe here for as long as you need." Lena blinked rapidly, tears gathering despite her effort to hold them back. No one had spoken to her with kindness in a long time. "Why? Why would you help me?" she whispered. Callum glanced around his barn, the place that held everything he valued. "Because you're scared. And nobody should be left alone when they're scared." Her breath hitched, but this time it wasn't from terror. For the first time since she'd started running, Lena felt the faintest spark of hope. The hours after sunrise passed in a quiet sort of haze. Callum gave Lena time to breathe, time to settle, time to stop shaking. He didn't press her with questions or try to pull her from the hayloft too quickly. Instead, he busied himself with feeding the horses and checking the tack, letting the soft rhythm of ranch work fill the silence. Lena watched him from her corner, wrapped in the wool blanket like armor. Each movement he made was slow, deliberate, as though he didn't want to startle her. He was enormous broad shoulders, thick arms, hands that could probably snap a fence post in two. Yet he handled every creature around him with tender precision. Even his voice carried a softness that surprised her. She had expected the giant to be loud, commanding. Instead, he was quiet, nearly gentle by late morning. The exhaustion loosened its grip enough for her to stand. She made her way toward the stall door, her steps tiny and careful. Callum noticed immediately and stepped aside to give her a clear path. She reached for the bucket he'd set out earlier, dipped her hands into the cool water, and splashed her face. The shock of cold grounded her. Callum approached only when she lifted her gaze and nodded. "Feeling steadier?" he asked. "A little," Lena whispered. He offered her a biscuit wrapped in a cloth. She hesitated only a moment before accepting. The first bite nearly made her dizzy. She hadn't eaten in almost a full day. Callum leaned against a beam, arms crossed, not blocking her, not looming, just nearby. "If you need more, I've got plenty in the house." Lena shook her head as she chewed. "This is enough." "Thank you." Her voice carried sincerity and fear. Callum recognized the second part instantly. "You don't gotta worry," he said softly. "Nobody comes out this way unless they're looking for me." That, Lena realized with a chill, was exactly what frightened her, because someone was looking for her. She opened her mouth to warn him, but the sound of distant hoofbeats cut through the air like a blade. Her entire body froze. The biscuit slipped from her fingers and fell to the dirt floor. Callum's expression hardened immediately. Years of living alone on the outskirts had sharpened all his senses. He knew trouble when he heard it. He stepped toward the barn door, stopping just short of going outside. "You expecting someone?" he murmured. Lena's breath came in sharp bursts. Her fingers clutched the edge of the blanket. "They're looking for me," she whispered. "The man I ran from, he sent people out at dawn. They have horses, guns. They won't stop until—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Callum nodded once, slow, thoughtful, and something in his demeanor shifted. The gentle giant didn't disappear, but a new version of him rose up alongside it. Protective, sharp, uncheckable. "How many riders?" he asked calmly. "I don't know. Maybe 3. Maybe 5. They hurt you?" His tone held iron. Lena hesitated. "Yes." Callum's jaw clenched. A storm gathered behind his quiet eyes, a rage not explosive or wild, but deep, steady, and terrifyingly controlled. "All right," he said, stepping back from the door. "Then we ain't giving them any reason to find you." He grabbed a worn coat from a hook and tossed it to her. "Put that on. Helps hide your dress." Lena struggled into it, her hands shaking. "Get up there," he said, pointing to the loft ladder. "Behind the hay bales. They won't see you." She obeyed without question. By the time she tucked herself out of sight, the hoofbeats were close, far too close. Callum moved to the barn entrance, shoulders squared like a living wall. His massive frame blocked nearly all the light coming in. The riders slowed their horses in front of his property. Lena pressed both hands to her mouth. Fighting a cry, Callum stood steady, ready. Trouble had finally reached the ranch. And for the first time, Lena wasn't facing it alone. The riders reined in their horses just outside the barn, the sharp clatter of hooves echoing across the quiet ranch. Dust swirled in the sunlight as the men, 3 of them, scanned the property with hard, suspicious eyes. Their coats were travel-worn, their expressions urgent, and every single one had a hand near a holstered gun. Lena watched them through a tiny gap between the hay bales, breath trembling in her throat. She could only see the boots and the lower halves of their horses, but she recognized them immediately, the same men sent the night she fled. The same ones who shouted her name into the darkness as she ran. Callum stepped into the barn doorway before they could call out to him. He didn't grab a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, massive, steady, unmovable, as if the entire building behind him rested on his shoulders. The lead rider, a square-jawed man with a red bandana around his throat, cleared his voice. "Mornin', Reed." Callum nodded once. "Mornin'. We're looking for someone," the man said. "A girl, young, slim, brown hair. Ran off in the night. You seen anyone pass through?" Lena's heart pounded so hard she feared they'd hear it from below. Callum didn't flinch. "Can't say I have." The rider leaned forward in his saddle. "You sure?" "Folks said they saw tracks headed this direction from the woods." "I get stray cattle, coyotes, lost travelers," Callum replied evenly. "Tracks don't always mean much." The second rider, thinner and meaner looking, peered over Callum's shoulder toward the barn interior. "Mind if we look around?" Callum's expression didn't change, but the set of his jaw did. Lena could feel his protective instinct rise like a shield around her. "I do mind," he said plainly. The men exchanged a look. The thinner rider clicked his tongue. "We ain't askin' permission, Reed. If she's here?" "She's property." Callum's voice cut him off like a blade. "She ain't property." His words rang out, deeper than thunder, shaking even the loft above. The men stiffened. The lead rider narrowed his eyes. "You're actin' awful strange over a simple question." Callum took one slow step forward. The horses shuffled nervously. Even animals sensed the shift in him. "You men are scarring my wife," he said. Lena's breath stopped altogether. The riders blinked in confusion. "Your wife?" the leader echoed. Callum crossed his arms, filling the entire doorway. "That's right. She's restin' inside, and I won't have you stomping around bothering her." A long, stunned silence followed. Lena pressed her hand to her mouth. She hadn't expected him to lie, especially not a lie like that. The word wife hit her like a warm shock, confusing and comforting all at once. The thin rider scoffed. "Reed, you ain't got a wife." "You," Callum cut him off again, his voice dangerously quiet. "You calling me a liar on my own land?" The challenge hung in the air like a drawn gun. The men shifted uncomfortably. Callum Reed was not the kind of man they wanted to provoke. Everyone in the county knew the giant cowboy kept to himself, but when pushed, he was a storm wrapped in skin. The lead rider cleared his throat, suddenly less bold. "We didn't mean any disrespect. Just doing our job." "Then your job's done here," Callum said. "Ain't no runaway girl on my property. Just my wife getting the rest she deserves." He didn't blink, didn't falter, didn't give them a single crack to pry open. After a tense moment, the riders tugged their reins and turned their horses away. "We'll be moving on then," the leader muttered. "Do that," Callum said. They rode off, dust and tension fading with distance. When the sound finally disappeared, Callum stepped back into the barn and exhaled slowly. "Lena," he called gently. "You can come down now." She descended the ladder with trembling legs. When she reached the ground, she stared up at him, voice barely a whisper. "You said I was your wife." Callum rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly shy. "Only thing I knew would make him leave." "But you risked yourself," she said. "For me." His eyes softened, warm and unwavering. "I'll risk more than that if they come back." Lena's heart swelled with a feeling she hadn't let herself believe in for a long time, safety, and something dangerously close to trust. The hours after the riders left were some of the quietest Lena had ever lived through. Not empty quiet, safe quiet. The kind that wrapped around her instead of pressing in. The barn no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt steady. Like a refuge she hadn't known she needed until she stepped into it. Callum didn't bring up what he'd said to the riders. He didn't tease her, didn't apologize, didn't act like he'd done anything unusual. After declaring her his wife in front of armed men, he simply went back to his chores as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Lena, still trembling from the encounter, watched him with a swirl of emotions, gratitude, confusion, and something warmer she was afraid to name. When she finally emerged from the barn, wrapped still in his oversized coat, Callum looked up from fixing a fence post. "You eat yet?" he asked, voice casual but eyes careful. She shook her head. "Come on then," he said, jerking his chin toward the house. "Let's get you fed." His cabin sat a short distance from the barn, a modest structure made of thick logs and stone. As they walked, the earth beneath her feet felt softer somehow, as though she didn't have to carry every ounce of fear alone anymore. Inside, Callum lit a lamp, washed his hands, and began preparing food without fuss. Lena hovered by the door, unsure where to stand, unsure if she even belonged in a place this warm. "You can sit," he said gently, nodding toward the small wooden table. "Ain't no harm in restin'." She obeyed slowly, her body stiff with habit, one foot ready to run. But the chair didn't swallow her whole, and the ceiling didn't crack under her presence. Nothing bad happened when she took up space. That realization alone made her fingertips tremble. Callum set a plate in front of her: eggs, biscuits, and a slice of ham. Simple, perfect. Her eyes stung. "No one's cooked for me in months," she murmured. Calum shrugged, taking the seat across from her. "Then it's overdue." Lena ate in small bites at first, watching him from beneath her lashes. He didn't stare, didn't pry. He ate quietly, occasionally sipping water. Giving her room to settle. After the meal, she helped wash the dishes despite his insistence that she didn't have to. The warm water over her hands felt like a reminder that life didn't always have to be cold. Later, on the porch, Callum sat in his usual rocking chair, and Lena took the smaller one beside him. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting gold across the ranch. Crickets began their chorus. A breeze stirred the tall grass. For the first time since she'd run, Lena breathed without pain. Callum spoke after a long stretch of companionable silence. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "Men like that don't give up easy." Lena swallowed, fingers tightening around the blanket around her shoulders. "I know, but so will I," he added. His voice was firm, a wall she could lean against. "They ain't attacking you while I'm standing." Something warm bloomed in her chest at his words. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he said. Then, with a small smile that caught her off guard, he added, "I know you're strong. Took courage to run. Takes even more to keep living." Her eyes softened. No one had ever said she was strong before. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. Callum shook his head. "You ain't? Even after what you said? About me being your wife?" His cheeks reddened slightly under his beard. "Had to say something that'd make those men back off." "Ain't mean nothin'. Unless you wanted to." Lena's breath caught not in fear this time, but in a quiet, dangerous hope. For now, though. She only nodded. And for the first evening in a long time, she let herself imagine a future that didn't hurt. The next few days passed like a fragile miracle. Lena settled into a gentle routine, helping Callum with the chickens, sweeping the porch, brushing down the horses when her strength allowed. The ranch became familiar in the softest ways. The creak of the porch boards at sunrise, the scent of fresh hay, the low rumble of Callum's voice when he talked to the animals. She was still skittish, still waiting for the ground to drop out beneath her feet. But every hour beside Callum eased another knot inside her. He didn't hover, didn't smother her with questions or expectations. He let her heal at her own pace, and that more than anything made her trust him. But safety built too quickly can feel like a dream. And dreams often crack when reality comes knocking. The first sign arrived. Quietly, Callum was chopping wood behind the house while Lena gathered laundry from the line. The sun was warm, the air bright. Birds trilled from the fence posts. Everything felt peaceful until Lena spotted something glinting in the dirt near the well. Horseshoe print. Fresh. Too fresh. Her breath seized. She knelt, touching the edges of the indent. The soil was soft, meaning the horse had passed through sometime that morning. Callum noticed her frozen posture and came over. "You okay?" he asked. Lena pointed to the print. Someone was here. Callum crouched beside her, his expression darkening. "Ain't one of my horses." He stood and scanned the tree line, the quiet weight of danger settling over him like armor. "Let's go inside," he murmured. Lena hugged her arms tight as they entered the cabin. Her heartbeat thudded violently. Callum checked the windows, latched the door, then turned to her with steady eyes. "They're sniffing around again," he said. "Means they're getting desperate." Lena's stomach twisted. "I thought, after you told them, I hoped they'd stop." "Men like that don't stop," Callum said gently. "Not till someone stands up to 'em proper." She sank into a chair, the room tilting slightly. Memories rushed back her captor's controlling grip. The threats, the bruises, the way her life narrowed to a single command: obey. Running had been her only escape. And even now, with miles of land between her and him, she felt his shadow on her skin. Callum knelt in front of her, big hands resting on his thighs. "Lena," he said softly, "you ain't alone anymore." Tears pricked her eyes. "I'm scared, Callum." "I know," he whispered. "But fear don't mean you're broken. It means you're human. It means what happened to you was wrong." His words shook something loose inside her, something she had held tight for too long. "They'll hurt you," she said, voice cracking. "If they find out you're helping me." Callum's jaw tightened. "They can try." His calmness frightened her almost as much as the men searching for her. But there was something else, to a sense of safety so strong it made her chest ache. That afternoon, Callum insisted they move her sleeping place from the barn to the small guest room inside the house. "Closer to me means safer," he said simply. Lena hesitated. Being inside a house with a man, especially a man who claimed her as his wife to strangers, should have scared her senseless. But with Callum, it didn't feel frightening. It felt sheltered, like stepping into a home she hadn't dared imagine. That night, she slept deeper than she had in a week, but the peace didn't last out just before dawn. Callum jolted awake to the sound of a horse neighing sharply. He threw on his boots and grabbed the lantern. "Callum?" Lena whispered from her doorway, eyes wide. He raised a hand. "Stay inside." He stepped onto the porch, lantern swinging. His dog growled low beside him. Then he saw it, a piece of torn fabric caught on the fence post. Lena's fabric dots. Someone had been close. Very close, and they weren't finished searching. Callum's voice hardened, almost a growl. "They're coming back." Lena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Her past had found her trail again, and this time, it wasn't leaving without a fight. The sheriff's visit had shaken the ranch, but it did something else too. It tethered Ellie and Jonah together more tightly than either of them knew how to handle. For days afterward, a strange quiet settled between them. Not the awkward kind, but the charged kind. The kind that hummed like the air before a storm. Ellie felt it every time. She stepped into the kitchen and found Jonah already there, leaning against the counter with that broad-shouldered stillness that filled up a room. She felt it when she walked past him in the barn and sensed his eyes tracking her without him meaning to. And she felt it most at night, lying awake in the attic bedroom he'd given her, listening to his heavy footsteps on the floor below, slow, steady, protective. Jonah wasn't a man who spoke much, but his silence was changing. It wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, watchful, and Ellie realized she'd begun to depend on it. Still, neither of them dared talk about the thing they were both circling around that moment. When danger pressed in and Jonah had pulled her close against his chest and said to the sheriff, "She's my wife," Jonah seemed to avoid the topic on purpose, throwing himself into work like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. He repaired fences that didn't need repairing, fed livestock twice, even restacked lumber in the tool shed for no reason at all. But Ellie wasn't fooled. Every time he glanced at her, those quick, stolen looks, she saw the truth in them. He remembered what he'd said, and it had done something to him. One afternoon, she carried lunch out to where he was mending a fence line. The day was crisp, the sun warm, the grass brushing her skirts as she walked. Jonah straightened when he saw her, wiping sweat from his brow. "You didn't have to bring that out," he murmured. "I wanted to," she said softly. Something flickered in his expression. "You ought to be resting. You've been working too hard." "I like working with you," she admitted before she could stop herself. Jonah paused, shoulders going still as if the words hit him straight in the chest. He took the tin plate from her hands, their fingers brushing, and Ellie felt the spark all the way up her arm. Jonah froze at the contact too, but he didn't pull away quickly, not like before. Instead, his hand lingered just a second too long. "Ellie," he began, voice low. She swallowed. "Yes?" He didn't finish. "Couldn't." He shook his head, stepped back, and forced himself to look at the distant tree line instead of her. She watched him in silence, her heart aching with something warm and frightening. That evening, a summer storm rolled in dark clouds. A roar of thunder, wind rattling the shutters. Ellie was closing the barn doors when lightning split the sky. She flinched, gasping. Jonah turned instantly, striding toward her with long steps. "You all right?" His voice was rough, protective, deeper than the thunder itself. Before she could answer, another strike lit up the ranch. Ellie stumbled back, and Jonah caught her by the arms, steadying her close enough she could feel his breath. "You're safe," he murmured. "I won't let anything touch you." Ellie's heartbeat wasn't from fear anymore, for a suspended, fragile moment. Their faces were inches apart, him towering over her, her fingers unconsciously gripping his shirt, both of them breathing the same storm-tainted air. Jonah seemed to realize it at the same time she did. He pulled back slowly, reluctantly. "I should check the horses," he muttered. Voice strained. But Ellie knew the truth. Now, it wasn't just safety he wanted for her. It was her. By the time the storm passed, and the ranch settled into its usual quiet, something between Ellie and Jonah had shifted. So deeply that neither of them could pretend anymore, not even to themselves. Ellie felt it first in the small moments, like when Jonah poured her coffee before his own, when he repaired the attic window so the morning sun wouldn't fall directly on her face, when he left a folded quilt outside her door because the nights were getting colder. These weren't gestures of obligation. They were the quiet habits of a man who'd already given his heart away without meaning to. And Ellie found herself softening in ways she had been terrified of. She was no longer the trembling runaway girl hiding in a stranger's barn. She was a woman who felt safe enough to breathe, to laugh, to hope. A woman who caught herself watching the slow curve of Jonah's smile or the way he held a mug in his huge hands, like he was afraid to crush it. She wanted to stay, but she feared wanting that too much. One evening, after supper, Jonah stepped outside to check on the livestock. Ellie followed him not because she needed anything, but because the sight of his lantern, light across the yard, pulled her like a tether. He didn't hear her approach until she was close. "You should be inside," he said gently, not turning yet. "It's cold." "You always say that," she teased. "Maybe I just like being around you." Jonah froze, not in discomfort, but in disbelief. Slowly, he set the lantern down and faced her fully. The sky above them was a velvet stretch of stars. The air smelled like damp earth after the storm. And Jonah looked at her with a rawness she'd never seen in him before. "Ellie." His voice was low. "About what I said. When the sheriff was here." Her heart thudded in her chest. "I know. I shouldn't have said it," he murmured, stepping closer. "But I'm not sorry I did." The admission cracked something open in her. She swallowed. "Jonah, I've been running so long I don't remember what it feels like to belong anywhere." His eyes softened deep, warm blue-gray like storm clouds after rain. "You belong here," he said. "If you want to." Ellie's breath caught. He wasn't offering protection anymore. He wasn't offering a lie to keep her safe. He was offering himself, and for the first time in her life, Ellie didn't feel fear when a man drew close. Jonah lifted a hand, huge, gentle, hesitant, and brushed a curl behind her ear. His fingertips lingered at her jaw, warm against her skin. She leaned into the touch without thinking, and Jonah's breath hitched like he hadn't expected her to let him. "I ain't a fancy man," he said quietly. "I don't know how to say things pretty. But if you stay, I'll spend every day making sure you never feel alone again." Tears stung Ellie's eyes. "Happy ones. Disbelieving ones. You already do," she whispered. Jonah stepped closer, so close she could feel the slow rise of his chest against hers. "Then stay," he murmured, barely above a breath. "Not because I said you were my wife. Not to hide. Stay because you want to." And Ellie, shaking, overwhelmed, heart blooming like sunrise, finally told the truth. "I want to." The words struck Jonah like a blow. He exhaled, shaky, and pulled her gently into his arms. Ellie melted into him, her cheek pressed against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like she had always belonged there. For a long moment, neither spoke. The ranch was quiet. The world was still. And Jonah whispered, "You don't have to run anymore." "Ellie," she looked up at him. "And you don't have to be lonely anymore," she replied. Jonah cupped her face, searching her eyes, asking a silent question. Ellie nodded. He kissed her soft, slow, warm, with all the tenderness of a giant who had finally found the one thing he never thought he deserved. And from that night forward, she wasn't pretending to be his wife. She was choosing to be.